I interviewed at several places, Carnegie Mellon, and I can't remember some of the other places that I went to interview. But I decided I really loved teaching. And as much as I enjoyed doing research, and I had quite a few publications at that point, I was fortunate enough to be in that position. I had the option of really seeking a research-oriented position. And I just realized I wanted to teach. That's what I most wanted to do.
Hi, everyone. This is Garth, and you've just heard Virginia Andreoli Mathie. Jane, we went to Ginny's house and conducted this interview. Can you just tell us about Ginny, or what really sticks out to you as you think back upon this interview?
I guess I was surprised that, as I've known Ginny for many years, and I still learned some new things about her in the course of interviewing. I think it's one of the pleasures of PsychSessions is that you do get to know people at a different, deeper level because the nature of the conversation just takes you there. And so I've been associated with Ginny through the Society for Teaching of Psychology for many years. And then I had the pleasure of working with her at James Madison. I also had the challenge of following her as the chair of the psychology department. And that was not an easy task, believe me, because she's an absolutely elegant and powerful leader. So it was great to see her and to see her happy in retirement and willing to talk about the kind of impact that I know she made in psychology.
Jane, you and I had conversations and some laughs about the leadership style differences of you following in Ginny's footsteps, which I remember fondly. Just
yes, Ginny.
Those were pretty funny.
Ginny is a very gentle, almost Quaker-like leader, building consensus as she goes. And that's not exactly my style. I've been described more as a field commander. And so I think people had a little bit of adjustment to make when I came in after Ginny. But we worked really well together, and I was really proud of the time that I spent at James Madison.
Well, obviously, both leadership styles very, very effective for each of you in your careers and for that department, a very impressive department there at JMU. So thanks to Ginny for hosting us. We had a great time, and I think you're all going to, you've probably heard the name Ginny Mathie a lot, but Ginny's been retired for a little while. So former STP president, and has had put her fingerprint onto the national teaching of psychology scene for a long time, and we all benefit from it. And here she is with Jane and myself. This is Ginny Mathie. We know you want to reach every student in your course to help every student individually succeed. But how do you find out what each student wants and needs? Macmillan Learning's Achieve for Psychology offers a solution. Ask them. Achieve puts goal setting and reflection surveys in each course, where students share their aspirations, thoughts, and concerns about what they are trying to learn. Their responses help you tailor lessons and assignments, and addresses both individual and class-wide needs. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psychsessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
The PsychSessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. PsychSessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. PsychSessions is sponsored by W.W. Norton. Are you looking for more activities to promote scientific literacy? ZAPS 3.0 interactive labs from W.W. Norton are brief, hands-on activities that invite students to actively participate in the process of psychological research and discovery. Utilizing a consistent 5-part framework and incorporating transparent design principles, students experience classic psychological studies like the Stroop effect, false memory, the serial position effect, signal detection, and more. Once they've completed the experiment, students can compare their data with national data and their own classmates, offering the opportunity for rich in-class or online discussions. Bring the science of psychology to life for your students with Zaps. For PsychSessions listeners new to Zaps, you can try it for free the next time you teach. Just go to siegel.wwnorton.com/PsychSessions, and the folks at WW Norton will even integrate it into your LMS for you. That is Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/PsychSessions.
Garth and guest host Jane Halonen from the University of West Florida interviewed Virginia Andreoli Mathie as part of the PsychSessions 2023 East Coast Tour for episode 185 of PsychSessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff.
Welcome to another episode of PsychSessions. We are in the home of Ginny Mathie. And so, Ginny, welcome to this interview. Thanks for doing this with us.
Well, thank you very much. I am very honored to be included in your podcast.
Well, it is our pleasure, and we've talked about you for a long time. And I know that Jane thinks the world of you. Jane, do you want to do a more formal introduction of Ginny, your friend?
Sure. Friend, colleague, great person, role model. Ginny and I became good friends through our association in the Society for Teaching of Psychology. And then I had the good fortune of coming to where Ginny was working. She had been the chair of the psychology department at JMU. And I ended up joining them in a similar capacity. And so I had the opportunity to work directly with her for 5 years. So what started out as a pretty close friendship became even more than that. We've been roommates at conventions. We are original members of DTOP, which you may not know about. Ever heard of DTOP? Dancing Teachers of Psychology.
Oh, okay. No, I have
a very
not.
special group.
I was never invited. Thanks.
You were probably 11 at the time that we...
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That's when we had energy.
Yeah. So I'm especially pleased to be able to participate in this interview, to be able to capture what's special about this great woman.
Well, thank you, Jane.
Well,
I appreciate that.
So you are now retired from JMU, is that correct?
That's correct. I retired from JMU in 2004. Hard to believe it's been that long. But then I served 4 years as executive director of Psi Chi. So I sort of transitioned from teaching, but still remained in the field of psychology. And then in 2008, my husband said it's time to enjoy life. So we did.
So was it a harder transition to go from JMU to Psi Chi, or from Psi Chi to retirement?
Oh, that's a good question.
And definitely harder to go from Psi Chi to retirement. I think when I left JMU, I'd been there for 29 years. It had been a good run. I enjoyed the college. Well, it was a college when I started, Madison College. I enjoyed university life, loved teaching. I even liked meetings, strange as that sounds. So I really liked academic life. But when I got to Psi Chi, I thoroughly enjoyed that opportunity to work with students in a different capacity. And that was a really special kind of job for me at the time. The office was in an old Victorian type house in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we were a small, close-knit group. And I lived in Chattanooga for a while, and then I went back and forth for quite a while. And I loved going to the conferences. I loved going to chapters. I thoroughly enjoyed all the people that I met. And it was a wonderful way to stay connected to all my psychology friends. I still got to hang out with my buddies in STP. So it was just a thoroughly delightful and rewarding position. And so when I left that, I found it more difficult. I think it was just because it was a different atmosphere there. And And suddenly dropping that and not traveling and not seeing people, that first year was a little difficult.
Yeah, you think about that sometimes, Jane, right?
Oh, don't remind me.
Yeah.
Yes, because I'm at the stage where about every week someone says, aren't you retired yet? And I usually say something like, mind your own business.
Yes.
Because I'm not ready to surrender
Mm-hmm.
yet. And I do worry about, I know that transition year, whatever it turns out to be, is going to be difficult because of how meaningful academic life has been for me. So trying to figure out how to repurpose, that's going to be hard. So we may ask you to talk a little bit more about specific strategies, but I think we want to do some origin material before we get to retirement recommendations.
I would just want to, I do want to ask you about that executive director position, because I've seen Martha Zlakovich. Yeah. In that position, it's so visible. That person is everywhere. So I could imagine that was especially spring was probably very, very busy when you were in that position. And then to go from all that travel to nothing must have been shocking.
It was. And I think because although I had gone to Southeastern Psych Association meetings regularly, Eastern Psych Association meetings regularly, APA, APS conventions, those were things I'd gone to, but I really had not spent any time on some of the other regional conferences. So Psi Chi gave me the opportunity to do that. And so, yes, much more visible in that sense. And also back then, I was involved with the honor societies, the Council of Honor Societies. And so I got a chance to meet the directors or the heads of a variety of honor societies. And that was a very interesting organization and experience. And Psi Chi was one of the largest honor societies. So I think whoever was in my position had an opportunity to play a significant role in that organization as well, just because of our size and popularity as a major. So it was quite an experience, and I really loved it.
Yeah, it sounds like you wouldn't have written it differently to kind of move through to retirement that way.
No, it could not have been better.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I've got a question for both of you, actually. Garth, in at least one role that he's played, has been to all regional conferences. What title have you functioned under?
Director of Regional Conference Programming for STP.
All right. So between the two of you, which regional conferences do you think do the best job of supporting people who teach psychology?
Oh gosh, that's hard to say. I think they all had their own personality. I thought.
Yeah, I did too.
They were just different in many ways. I loved SIPA just because it was sort of a very relaxed group of people. Harold Moon. I mean, you think of people from SIPA, just fun-loving people. And I think maybe because we did more than just go to meetings, we tended to arrange dinners together after the meetings. It was just a different atmosphere. But I loved EPA. That was very Eastern, Northeastern. And they just were all a little different, I think, in what they offered. But I felt in all cases, they were supportive of students.
Yeah.
And I think for me, when I was in Psi Chi, that point was my focus. And I think all of the regional conferences and the leaders of those conferences at the time went out of their way to make students feel welcomed and appreciated and respected for what they were doing. And the research poster sessions were well attended. So I think in that sense, they were more common than they were different.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't do a lot of undergraduate research when I was at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. And so it was really interesting to attend all these conferences and see how undergraduate driven they were. And and I really appreciated that, particularly and I think that there is now lots of faculty are bringing their students to these conferences to present, but where I saw a lot of teachers of psychology in
sort of our circles who were doing that was RMPA is really strong, and they have a long history of the same people on that committee or who have been committed to it for a long time, like Eric Landrum, for example. But there's other folks as well. And so that creates, but it's a little smaller than even something like EPA, right? And so I don't know. There is, as far as which one does the best with teaching of psychology, the programming is different at every single conference. And so some of them run the teaching program as a pre-conference, like WPA, for example. There's another one off the top of my head, and then some work it in. And I've often wondered, is the teaching programming stronger if you do the pre-conference? And I don't know. It's hard for me to say that it is the best somewhere because they're just so different. And times have changed, right? So I think some of these used to, maybe some of the teaching pre-conferences used to thrive. But, funding maybe isn't the same as it was, or now we're in a post, I don't know if we're there, but after the pandemic, are people shortening their trips now so they're not willing to come in on a Wednesday or something like that for a pre-conference? So I just know that our STP people are in all of these regionals and are making those regionals better and are trying to carve out space for teaching of psychology, which is great. And then each one, because of legacy or just context, has their own unique challenges. So you can't actually look at one and compare it to another because sometimes a teacher of psychology and STP person has been on the executive committee forever, and sometimes they've never been on the executive committee. So that's a really long answer. It sounds like you're interviewing me.
Well, sort of. And I asked a question that neither of you answered, and I sort of knew that would happen when I asked that question. So we're good. Okay. We're good.
Yeah. Well, many people are doing great work just all over the country for that. And it's challenging work too. So, Jenny, I hear that you're Canadian.
I am.
Where did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in Toronto.
Okay.
And it was, at the time, I had 4 younger sisters. And that is where my love of teaching, desire to be a teacher really started. And I credit my math teacher in high school, Gary Flynn, who I loved math. And back then it wasn't that common for women to be in math, but we had 13 grades. And we went up to grade 13 back then. I don't think they do anymore in Canada, but when I was in high school, grade 13. And I remember when it was time to make a decision about what I was going to do, I was actually thinking, I thought I was going to York University to be a French teacher. That was what I thought I was going to do. And my teacher, Gary Flynn, said to me, "You don't belong in a French program. You belong in a math program." So he encouraged me and helped me apply to the University of Waterloo. And I went there in math and computer science as an undergraduate major. And he was the one, I think, that more than anyone stimulated my love of teaching. He was a teacher who did active learning, critical thinking, engaged students before it was a fad. He just had this knack of somehow gathering the students in and making mathematics fun. And I was inspired. So Toronto gave me my start. I kind of always knew I wanted to be a teacher. And when I told this story in one of my presentations, I don't remember which one now, but maybe several. But I was surprised that it was kind of similar to, I didn't know this about Charles Brewer, but when I listened to his podcast, he had a similar background in this regard. But I can remember as a child playing school in our garage. And my dad had gone to the school and they had surplus sales and bought, at the time there were four of us, 4 girls in the family. And he bought 4 school desks, real school desks from a classroom. And so he set them up in the garage, and that would be our classroom. And he bought a big chalkboard for me. And I was always the teacher, and my sisters and neighbor friends were always the students. And we set up the classroom, and I went so far as to write up assignment sheets and problem sheets.
How old were you?
I was, I was probably about 9 or 10, because remember my little sisters were still pretty young, and I would make them sit in the chair and not talk. And I just knew that I wanted to be a teacher. And it seemed as I progressed, when I was in elementary school, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And then when I was in high school, I wanted to be a high school math teacher. I knew I was going to do that. And when I went to Waterloo, I was sure I was going to be in the program for teaching. And then of course, when I got to college, I said, oh no, I really want to be a college teacher. So I always knew I wanted to teach. It just changed the context in which I would teach over the years. But I think fondly of my days, in school and in Toronto, and I still go back. My family's still there, so
wow.
I still go back quite a bit.
What did you study at the University of Waterloo? The math?
Yeah, so I was in the math and computer science program.
Oh, right.
And actually I was in the co-op program because my parents couldn't afford to pay for college. So
what does that mean, the co-op program?
Oh, so the University of Waterloo, and I assume it's still the case, although I have to say I'm not sure anymore, but they were very well known for their engineering and mathematics and computer science programs, and particularly because they were co-op programs. So you went to school for 4 months and then you worked for 4 months. And there was a co-op placement, and you interviewed with employers, and through a mutual selection process, you were assigned to a particular employer. So you worked there for 4 months, and you could change if you wanted to go somewhere else. My first work term I was hired by the Ontario government in their pretty new computer division, and I stayed there for all of my work terms. I worked with the Ontario government, which was wonderful because I had the opportunity to work with a variety of departments within the government. Our department was the one responsible for implementing computer programs and computers in all of the departments in the government. This was back in 67, 68 when I started. 67, I guess I started. And I started off as a computer programmer, and then worked my way through and became in the end a systems analyst. And I remember one of the last jobs that I had there in my work term was to train people to use some new software, some new program. They were now converting files to digital files. Of course, very different than what that means now. But so I had an opportunity to really do some training, and I found that as much as I loved math and loved computers and programming, I also loved teaching and working with individuals and seeing them blossom. And so I had taken psychology courses when I was my freshman year actually at Waterloo, and fell in love with psychology. And so that's kind of, I loved my computer work. And if I were not doing psychology, I think that's what I would be doing. So
the snag that psychology offered you, how did that flourish? I mean,
well, about halfway, I can't remember exactly when it was, maybe my third year in the math program, I had accumulated quite a few credits. Back then, there was a general program and an honors program. And I was in the honors program, which meant I had to take more hours each semester. And it was a 4-year program. And the the process was just a little different than in the general program. Well, I got so interested in psychology, and I was taking some psychology courses, and one of the professors in psychology, Harold Miller, who is from the University of Michigan and a relatively new faculty member at Waterloo, he was a mathematical psychologist, and he was looking for a teaching assistant. And one of my professors, and I don't remember who now, recommended me to him, even though I was an undergraduate, because I had my computer and mathematics background, but I also had quite a few psychology courses at that point. So Harold started to work with me. He got me involved in his research, and then a semester, I think, in doing research with him, and then he invited me to be his teaching assistant. So I did that, and with his mathematical psychology course, and I helped with research. I was on his research team, and that got me hooked in psychology. So at that point, I finished my math degree at the general degree level, got a general degree in mathematics and computer science, and then went an extra year and got my degree, my honors degree in psychology. So it was that blend, but Harold probably was the inspiration at the undergraduate level, and he's the one that steered me towards psychology. And then when it came time for graduate programs, it was computer science or psychology, and I chose psychology.
Did you, at what point did you know that graduate school was going to happen? Or I guess going into you took an additional year to get your psychology credits, right?
So I was there for 4 years at Waterloo. Okay. So I finished in the 4 years with the 2 degrees. And well, that's a good question. I don't know that it just happened. Okay. I don't quite know. It was, in some ways, it was a challenge. My family was Italian heritage, and even though my parents had been born in Canada, there were a lot of relatives who had this perspective that women, if you went to high school, that was a great thing, and that's all you really needed. So going to college was for my dad to let me go and then let me go away to college was, for him, I think, a real struggle. He had a lot of resistance from family members. You don't let your daughter. By that time, there were 5 girls in the family, and you don't let your daughters go off to another city by themselves. And so there was a lot of resistance in the family, and I'm so grateful to my parents that they rose above that and decided it was all right for a woman to go to college. And then when it came time to go to graduate school, I was accepted to stay at Waterloo in their psychology graduate program. I was also accepted at a couple other places in the U.S., but the one I was most interested in was University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, because I loved social psychology, and John Thibault was at UNC, and he was just my idol. And so when I got accepted at UNC, I said, yes, that's where I want to go. And so not only now was I going away to another level, but I was going to the United States to live, a foreign country. And so it sort of happened, but it was also in the context of kind of another challenge for my family. But it just happened. People encouraged me. I feel so grateful that I had some very good mentors along the way in everything that I did. And I think I would just be forever grateful to those people who encouraged me and sort of opened the doors without really a lot of thought. Just, you're going to graduate school. Oh, all right. I guess I'll go to graduate school. And
do you ever? I wonder. I'm sure this comes up, and I'm wondering if you have stories. Either of you have stories about this, about an undergraduate who wants to go study with someone at a particular institution because they're pretty renowned. And then they get there, but the person themselves is not maybe easy to work, because some of that stuff wouldn't come through in the research, right? Or what they're writing up. And, not everybody is a great person to work with or whatever. Does that happen with any of your undergraduates that you've heard of? Or
I'm sure it happens. I don't know that I really heard a lot of cases. In my own case, John Thibault was an absolutely wonderful mentor and such a kind, gentle, supportive man. I remember getting there in North Carolina, which quite a shock in terms of cultural differences from where I grew up in Toronto. And I think within the first week, he invited me to his house for dinner, he and his wife. And I was, I think, the third Canadian student to go to UNC in psychology. Bill Turnbull was before me, and I can't remember who was before him. There was another Canadian student, Mike Holmes, I think, maybe was before Bill, who ended up, I think, at the University of Waterloo. But at any rate, so I was not the first Canadian, but John Thibault invited us into his home. His door was open whenever I needed to talk. And I was homesick at first, I must admit. It was quite a change. And he was just the kindest, most empathetic man. I just dearly loved him. So in my case, he was even more than I could have wished for as a mentor. I've heard some students say they've been disappointed in their experiences when they got to graduate school, but I don't know it was necessarily because of a professor. I don't know, Jane, have you had any students?
My response is that the idea that you're going to a specific place to study with a specific professor is pretty rare.
Okay.
Because the competition to get into graduate school is so intense. I often advise students who are hell-bent on going to graduate school that finding someone that you want to study with and lobbying that person and learning what they've done and demonstrate that you could be of value to them is one strategy that you can use, but it's also a time-consuming strategy. Yeah. And so most students can't afford to do that. Is it the case that all advisors are as wonderful as Ginny's? Hell no. Lots of people have struggles with their advisors. I don't want to say a whole lot more about that in case my advisor listens. But I think if you have the right advisor, it can make a huge difference in your identifying as a good professor, as someone who's going to make good contributions to the discipline, and can also make a difference in how quickly you get through. I mean, sometimes bad advisors mean you will not get through. So that's kind of a bleak note to end that on.
Well, I'm glad that you were so far from home and found someone who you worked really well with, who sounds like it was sort of a family away from your family.
It was in many ways. Interestingly, ended up not doing a lot of research with John Thibault. I got involved with the research team with Steve Warshell, and I did a lot of research with him. But John Thibault was my dissertation chair, and he was in master's, and he was just always there. He was the type of faculty member I hope I was, in the sense that he was not possessive of his students. He allowed you to pursue your interests. He encouraged you, supported you in doing that. If you needed help finding someone else for research because you had a particular interest or idea in mind, he would help facilitate that. So I don't think there are a lot of faculty members like that. I think they like to have their team, and they're rather possessive of that. But he was not. So it was a very fortunate opportunity for me to be able to work with him at the beginning and to have him as my mentor and advisor throughout my graduate training.
I just have one follow-up question, and that is, as a Canadian, what was most stunning to you about coming into the North Carolina culture? Do you remember what was hard to adjust to, or what surprised you?
The culture in general, or the university?
Either one.
Oh, yes. I was amazed, I guess, that in some respects, the Civil War was still being fought. and I guess
you mean the War of Northern Aggression?
Yeah. And just the prejudice. Toronto's a pretty ethnic city. Mm-hmm. I grew up, Italian background. And there were, and I don't know, it just was a different kind of environment. And I got to North Carolina, and I guess I was shocked that there was still the level of segregation that there was even in 1971 when I arrived. My roommate, in my first year, was an elementary school teacher, and she taught in a predominantly African American school. And she quit after 2 months. She couldn't take it. The stress of the environment was just too much for her. And so she ended up leaving teaching. She said, I couldn't do it. But she would bring home these stories that just broke my heart of these kids, these Black children who were so disadvantaged. I guess I just hadn't been exposed to that before. And so I think that was the greatest shock for me, is dealing with that. I remember I spent a lot of time in Detroit when I was in college because I dated somebody at the University of Michigan, not my husband, but someone else. And I remember we went to see Gone with the Wind. And of course, you can imagine in Detroit and at the theater and a lot of college students, everybody cheering for the North. I also went to see Gone with the Wind when I was in North Carolina. And it was a completely different experience. So that was probably the thing that I noticed the most. That's a vivid
example.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Wow. Yeah. So, North Carolina, UNC, you finish up there?
Mm-hmm. I did. 1975.
1975. And what's next after that?
What's next? So I did look at some jobs in Canada, and I did interview for a position in Winnipeg, actually, University of Winnipeg. And I interviewed at several places, Carnegie Mellon, and I can't remember some of the other places that I went to interview. But I decided I really loved teaching. And as much as I enjoyed doing research, and I had quite a few publications at that point, I was fortunate enough to be in that position. I had the option of really seeking a research-oriented position. And I just realized I wanted to teach. That's what I most wanted to do. And I felt that I could do that at a smaller institution. So I interviewed, one of the places I interviewed was Madison College. And if you can imagine, I interviewed at the University of Winnipeg, and it was February. They were having a warm spell. It was 25 below. And, they were ushering me around through all the tunnels. But I loved it. It was a wonderful place, I have to say. Back then, it was just delightful, and the people were so friendly. Thought, and I'd be back in Canada. That would be a good thing. A week later, I interviewed at Madison College, still in February. The daffodils and crocuses were up. The sun was shining, and it was 75 degrees. And I said, I think I know where I want to be. So I started at Madison College, and became JMU, and James Madison University, and I was there for 29 years.
Wow. I was born in Winnipeg. Yeah. And so I know those prairie winters very, very well. And after I got my BA in Saskatoon, I thought, y'all know we don't have to live here, right? So I went to California.
Good choice in some ways.
Yeah. And now in Washington, in Seattle. But okay. So did you do any teaching when you were at UNC?
Oh, I did. Yes. I was started off as my first year as a teaching assistant for John Thibault. And then I was a teaching assistant. I think with Steve Warshell for a year in social psych. And then in my third and fourth year, I was just an instructor on my own. Because I had a Canada Council doctoral fellowship, I had the luxury of kind of doing things for nothing. They didn't have to pay me, basically.
Oh,
so
that's a good deal for them.
So I got an instructor position, and so I taught social psych for every semester for my last 2 years. Mm-hmm.
What would, how would your students describe your teaching style?
Ooh. Well, it depends, I think, on what class I asked.
Okay, so let's go with social.
I think they would probably say structured, engaging, flexible to some extent, fairly casual. My students used to call me Ginny. I mean, I was very comfortable with that. So I think friendly, helpful. My students would often say I was willing to take time, to meet with them. Now, if you ask my statistics students, they might have a different opinion because I did teach statistics, especially toward the end of my teaching career. I primarily taught undergraduate statistics. And I think they might say rigid, hard. But I also tried to spend a lot of time one-on-one with students. And I think I've had students tell me that was valued by students in my class, that I did have office hours and I did spend time with students one-on-one. And I gave, especially in the last 10, 15 years, once I got involved in STP, I think particularly, that my teaching style changed. And I think I did become much more sensitive to the need to engage students more in the classroom, to do more active learning activities, to structure my class so that it wasn't you come to class, you listen, you take a test, and that's the end. Or you write a paper, that's the end. I can remember one time, diverging here a little bit.
That's all right.
I can remember one time I used to require papers in all my classes, even statistics, and they would hand them in at the end of the semester. I'd frantically be taking 3 days to grade them and write comments and all those kinds of things and give them back to them. And I remember one time a student came, after I gave back the paper, she came into my office in tears and was so upset. And she told me that, I can't remember the exact words, but it was something along the lines of, I've never seen so much red on a paper. I felt like it was covered in blood or something like that. I can't quite remember how she described it. I remember the blood part. And she, I think, was an English major and was used to writing papers. So she was stunned that there were all these red comments on her paper. And that was such an eye-opener for me as a teacher. I was practically in tears because she was feeling so bad at the way I had given her feedback. And I realized that that my feedback wasn't constructive. I thought it was. I thought I was helping them learn to write, reason, think. But I was making them feel bad. At least probably in many cases. I suspect she was not the only one that felt that way. She was the only one that had the courage to come in and tell me, perhaps. But it was such an eye-opener for me. And after that, I really tried to change the way I approached not only writing assignments, but all of my assignments, whether it was statistics or social psych or whatever, intro psych, whatever I was teaching. I tried to always give them opportunities to redo the work, if they had an assignment and they really messed up on it, I'd give them another one and say, okay, let's look at what you did. Let's go through it. And now here, go back and try again. In writing, I started having people submit papers in the middle of the semester, really minimized my feedback to try to be very strategic in how I commented on their papers, and let them rewrite. And then if they wanted to do another rewrite, they could do another rewrite. So I really changed my strategy in all of that. And so I think at the end, what students would say about my teaching would be quite different than what they would have said at the beginning of my teaching, because I think I was a pretty structured, rigid teacher at the beginning. That was my math and computer science. There's one way to write your code in your computer program, and if you mess up a letter, you you've got to redo it. And I think that's how I approach teaching in a way.
Well, I think that example illustrates the difference between feedback that is editing versus feedback that is developmental.
What a wonderful way to express it, Jane. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And I've heard the sea of blood discussion before, how high impact that is in a negative way for students. So that was good. I do recall I did, when I was director of the school, I had one complaint about you as a teacher. It was a student who came to my office and was really upset with you because he missed the cutoff by an A. And you were just not flexible enough to be able to grant extra credit points to him to help him get to an A. Could you? And I said, get out of my office because I support Dr. Mathie in this decision. But I know a lot of teachers struggle with that students in the end turn into grade grubbers. We hate that. But can you explain why it's important to hold the line?
Well, because I felt it was one of the things I think college should help do is help students develop a sense of responsibility and accountability, regardless of the subject matter. I just feel that that's the growth as a human being and as a mature human being. And so I always, in my courses, tried to provide opportunities for extra credit or try to give people, as I said, especially in the last 10, 15 years of my teaching, to give them opportunities to rewrite. They could take an exam twice in my class, in my all my classes. If they really messed up on the exam, I would sit with them, go over the exam, where they messed up, and then I always had a makeup exam that they could do, and then I just averaged the 2 grades. They knew up front how that procedure worked. But I always tried to give them opportunities. And what I often found is the students who would come to me and say, well, I only missed it by 2 points. Why don't you let me make it up? I'd say, well, did you do this or did you do this? And oftentimes those were the students that did not do the extra credit things that they could have done. And so I felt if I've given you the opportunity throughout the semester and you chose not to do it, I found it difficult because I felt it was unfair to the students who did do it to say, well, okay, I'll just give it to you, or make an exception, or I'll let you do it after the fact. So I think it was more a matter of, I felt bad. I always felt bad about that. And I hated to see students feel so upset about their grade. But at the same time, I felt it was helping to build, I hope it was helping to build a sense of responsibility.
Yeah, there should be a lesson in there.
So,
yeah,
I agree.
I hope there was a lesson. I hope they got it.
I don't know. I don't know.
I now build into my syllabus, here are ways not to make me happy. Do not come to me in the final week to ask for specialized opportunities because it's not fair.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about the administrative pull? Because you served as chair of the department for how long?
4 years.
4 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What prompted you to take on that level of responsibility?
I was cornered by 3 faculty from the counseling program, and they got me in the copy room, and they said, Jenny, we're going to keep you here until you say you're going to apply for the position. Ed McKee, Lenny Echterling, and Jack Presbury were the 3. And
all very dear men.
They are all very, very special people. And at any rate, they sort of talked me into applying. I think I had been the coordinator for the undergraduate program for many years, for the master's program in general psychology for many years. And I had sat on the counseling committee for many years as a liaison from the general psych program. And so I had worked with them actually since I started at JMU. And they just convinced me that it was a good thing to apply and that the programs would appreciate it and would value what I could do as department chair or department head. And so I applied and got the position. And I have to say, I really enjoyed doing it. At the time, all of the graduate programs were in the department with the undergraduate programs. So I was teaching in the graduate program. I was teaching the graduate statistics class for quite a while before they started hiring the measurement and assessment faculty members. So I taught the graduate statistics course. So I had a chance to interact fairly regularly with the school psychology and counseling psychology students, student affairs, student personnel, students. And so I knew all the programs. I really enjoyed it. And when it was time to leave, I was ready, I think, just to get back to teaching and to my family. I mean, it takes a lot of time, at least for me. I invested a lot of time in being a department head. And I think at the time my daughter was in high school and I was trying to fulfill family responsibilities. So I felt it was a good time. 4 years was good.
Could you identify what you thought was rewarding about it? Because we know some listeners may be debating about whether or not they should consider taking on administrative roles in their own departments.
Sure. Probably for me, two things I think I found most rewarding about that position. First was the opportunity to mentor faculty in a different way than you do as a colleague. And I think to try to encourage faculty to pursue their interests and be supportive of those interests. I found that so rewarding. For example, the school psychology program for many years had been doing a summer institute for school psychologists. And they were very successful at it. And the counseling program had never done that. And so I think it was Lenny and Helen Moore had come to me and said they really wanted to try it. They didn't know how it would be, probably lose money, but they really wanted to try it. And so, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it. And something like that, to be able to say, yes, I'll support that, even though I know it's going to cost money for the department, may not work as well as you hope, but let's try it and give you a chance to do it. That kind of experience you don't really get to do as a colleague. And so that for me was very rewarding to do those kinds of things for faculty. And I think the other, for me at the time, it was very rewarding because we were beginning the PsyD in combined school and clinical psychology. It was the first doctoral degree on campus, and Doug Brown and Harriet Cobb were instrumental in getting that program approved and developed. I can't take any credit for that, but I was the chair, the department head the first year it started, so I had the opportunity to implement that program and deal with the struggles of doing that, but also the rewards of starting a new program at the doctoral level, the first one at the institution. And then the same period of time, once they started, the assessment and measurement faculty wanted a doctoral program. So I had the opportunity to work with them and actually help them develop the program, get it through the approval process in the department, which was a struggle, I have to say, at first. But I loved the opportunity to try to bring people together and see the benefit of partnering with that group. And so that program got underway, and that was the second doctoral program on campus, and then it's mushroomed since then, of course. But those kinds of things, the opportunities that you get as a department head or an administrator, I've never been a dean as you have, so I don't know at that level so much, but certainly at the department head level, you are in the trenches still, and you are dealing with both the good and the bad of administration very directly, but the rewards of being able to encourage faculty to blossom and find their own path, and the opportunity to develop programming and help guide and spearhead it, to me was just an incredible opportunity and very, very satisfying.
And the downside of being an administrator, that can be a short answer. What drove you craziest about?
Oh, faculty evaluations. And not because I had problem children, so to speak. I know this sounds rather Pollyannish, but I felt at the time all of our faculty in the department were absolutely wonderful people and wonderful teachers, and all worked very hard. And I found it so frustrating to have to separate them out for who's going to get merit raises and who's not, and who's going to get excellent versus just satisfactory. And painful every year, because they were all working hard, making a contribution, doing wonderful things with students, all in different ways. They weren't all publishing at the same level. They weren't all getting great teacher evaluations, but they were all doing something that was contributing, important, and of value. And so trying to divide them up was just awful. I would come home and some nights I would be in tears during the faculty evaluation. I don't want to have to do this. But that's part of the responsibility. And so I always tried to, when I met with them individually, to give the feedback. I tried to explain kind of where I was coming from within the system, but also to let them know I valued what they did.
That's a special skill set to be able to pull that off without making enemies.
I don't know.
Yeah, that might not be a good conclusion.
Yeah, I don't know that I didn't make a few enemies here and there, but by and large, I felt supported by the faculty during that period of time. But I'm sure there were one or two people.
That's a huge downside to, I know people who, in that position, who are probably regret being in that position just because of the interpersonal stress that comes out of it.
Mm-hmm. But
it sounds like you knew about the greater good and impact that you were having, even with that, the downside of being an administrator.
I hope I was. I was a department head. And I think the coordinators of the programs, if you would have asked them at the time, would have said this was the case. I tried to lead by example, but also I tried to give them the freedom to do their thing with their programs. I don't think, at least I hope I did not, micromanage their programs. And I think that trying to just be one, I was I was the leader, and I did have a responsibility to be the leader. But I also, in meetings, I didn't direct in that sense. I tried to give them the flexibility and the freedom to tell me what they needed, and I would try to make sure I did my best to get it. Yeah. And
I can validate that because being the person who came after Ginny, not easy, because her leadership style is subtle and light touch. So I think that gave people a lot of freedom to be able to exercise who they wanted to become. And I, as far as I'm concerned, whatever enemies you may have generated, I didn't see them. I mean, people just routinely talked in reverent terms about what an impact you'd had. It was not fun to follow her. I'll just
you were magnificent. You carried us so much more forward than in many ways for the department.
Isn't it interesting, though, how leadership styles can change the whole landscape of the department?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the interactions and the progress. Yeah. Fascinating.
I think a secret to Ginny's success, she used it in an earlier explanation, is that she forges partnerships. And so I think that might be a good segue to talk about P3. How is it that you were such a driving force in the creation of P3? And you have to explain what P3 is for folks.
Sure. So P3 is Psychology Partnerships Project. And the focus was on developing partnerships across academic levels in psychology. And hopefully by doing that, providing a model for other disciplines to connect high school, community college, undergraduate, graduate faculty in and getting them to collaborate in the education process. So it started, to be honest, it probably started my first year as a faculty member in 1975 when I came to it was then Madison College, but James Madison University. One of my colleagues said, "Oh, you got to get involved in the Virginia Psychological Association." Being a new faculty member, I said, "Oh, I guess I better do that." And so I did. And it was a relatively small, cohesive association, primarily clinically oriented. But there were faculty members from a variety of smaller institutions. So I got involved in that. And my second year, I think it was the second year, I can't remember now, second or third year of membership, they asked me if I would work with one of the, I think he was a superintendent, and I can't remember which school district. Anyway, the superintendent, I think his name was Jim Page, if I remember correctly. And so I worked with him to develop high school psychology workshops for the Virginia Psych Association that we held. So we did that for, 4 or 5, 6 years. I can't remember now. But for several years, we did these as part of the Virginia Psych Association annual meeting. We invited high school psychology teachers to participate. Well, from that, I started to make the connections with these high school teachers. And so I decided to apply for a National Science Foundation grant. Was that pre-college education, I think it was called, program. And so I received a grant to have a 2-week institute at JMU for high school psychology teachers in the state of Virginia. And we did that. And then that led to kind of future involvement with high school teachers within the state. Well, when I became president of Division II of STP, I decided that one of my goals was to try to form these partnerships again with high school teachers, because I was, by that point, I was pretty involved in APA. I was very involved in STP over the years. Thank you to Charles Brewer, who got me involved in STP. But I had this vision of this conference that would bring these together, and that stemmed from the St. Mary's Conference. Tom McGovern and all that he did for that, and you were involved. But I saw what the St. Mary's Conference did and the kind of camaraderie that it fostered and the partnerships that it fostered. And so I thought, oh, maybe we could do this again. It's time for another conference, but this time perhaps to really focus more specifically on the collaboration across academic levels. So I was going to the education directorate at APA and to ask if they would support this. And at the same time, Randy Ernst and Charles Blair Broker, I think Randy was president of TOPS at the time, if I remember correctly. I think, looking over my notes there, I think that's what it was. But at any rate, he and I both went to Jill Reich, who was the education directorate's officer there at the time. We presented these ideas, and so she convinced us that we should just take our 2 ideas, and because they wanted a high school teachers conference, let's put all this together into a conference for everybody. And so that's how it started. And so we began to work together. You were on the committee. We formed this steering committee to start planning a conference, and it sort of mushroomed, really. It was going to be just like a 2 or 3 year project, and then it became a 4 or 5 year project, and we had the conference, and then a year later we had that follow-up meeting at APA, and it just mushroomed. So for me, collaboration and partnerships are something that I really value, and in a variety of ways. It's not just in teaching, but in a lot of my academic work, the parts I enjoyed the most were the parts that were partnerships within the department, my research partnerships with my research colleagues over the years. I did a lot of work with the Student Affairs Division at JMU. I thoroughly enjoyed that partnership. Across the state, across the country with STP. So it's something that I've always enjoyed and valued and found very rewarding and very inspirational. And I think for me, it would help me develop and grow as a professional and as a teacher. So it was sort of a natural fit for me and my background, but also with the encouragement of Jill Reich, because it never would have happened.
She was splendid.
She was, and it never would have happened without her. I mean, she was the inspiration for the way it developed. She was the one that got us the support from APA and many other organizations to support the conference. So,
and I think it had long-lasting legacy. I mean, it wasn't just the relationship. Some of my best professional friends and writing partners, like Dana, that grew out of that experience.
Yeah. The assessment all-stars.
Yeah,
that's right. The assessment all-stars. That's right.
All-stars. And the fact is that the Best Practice Conference was a byproduct of P3, and Best Practice then migrated to become the annual conference on teaching, which now I think is a bigger draw for the community than even going to APA. So I think the kinds of contributions were, I don't think we could have anticipated how big an impact P3 was going to have, but it was huge.
I hope so. I think one of my regrets about P3 perhaps is unlike St. Mary's Conference, for example, we did not publish a book. And it was sort of intentional. We felt we wanted not just something in writing, we wanted people doing things together, projects together. And so the emphasis was more on developing projects that would be able to be maintained over the years, that would foster collaboration across academic levels. And I kind of regret not having something concrete like that, but I also look and see how, the assessment conference that turns into a general teaching conference. Or I remember the International Conference on Teaching of Psychology, Viktor Karandashev, and he got that, and that went for several years. And then there were more local groups. I remember within some of the states, they started to form an academic association for teachers to come together.
And in fact, high school in particular mushroomed because of P3.
Yeah. So there is a legacy, I think, there. And maybe this is a good thing. It's embedded in many other organizations. So
I'm going to say it might be better than having a book as the final product.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
Well, in part because it was so widespread and entrenched. And a book, I mean, I was part of the St. Mary's book project, and once the book was done, I never looked at it ever again. So I think what you accomplished out of that was quite impressive. Yeah.
I have to say one of the, some of them were just on local levels, but Howard Thorsheim at St. Olaf's.
St.
Olaf's College. My memory is getting bad in my old age. Every year he would send me updates on his project. He was able to get an SF grant as a result of what he was one of the projects from the conference. And so he was collaborating with high school students and bringing them together for a physio-psych lab, I think it was, or I can't quite remember now. Neuropsych, I don't remember. But at any rate, for years he would send me updates on how he was doing. And I treasured those. Yes. It was so wonderful to see him thriving and knowing, it kind of started, at that conference. So yeah, those are good things.
I had an opportunity to reminisce a little bit about P3 talking with Roy Hopkins, who was the local host. And he reminded me that we had a fairly energetic dance to celebrate. Do you remember the dance that was part of P3?
Roy wasn't he St. Mary's?
He was St. Mary's.
He was St. Mary's.
I'm sorry, I got my
I think we did have a dance at St. Mary's.
We did.
But we also had a dance at JMU, of course. DTOP.
Yeah.
There were representatives there, so
Okay.
we had to have a dance.
All right. So pardon my confusion.
So, Ben, when we were talking to Ben a couple of days ago, Ludi Benjamin, one of the things that came out was that there are fewer and fewer people who are writing down the history of psychology. This is a thread that, when we were doing current work with APA on the Introductory Psychology Initiative, the thread goes back to P3 and St. Mary's.
Even further back than that.
Yeah.
And further back than
McKeechie's
that.
conferences.
Well, this is the thing. Somebody needs to write that out, even if it's sort of brief, just because that legacy can get lost. I mean, even the McKeechie conferences, that really is the first I'm hearing of this. And so I don't know. It's important. Maybe there's somebody out there who's listening to this.
I've actually pitched this idea to one of our friends to do an update of a book that was called The History of Teaching in Psychology. It really is time to try to pick up those threads, because when that book was published 30 years ago, it really did a good job of pulling those threads together. But the fact is that the history does need some integration and continuation. And I don't know if Regan is still considering that, but I'm hoping if he listens to this, it gets back on his desktop.
Oh, he's got nothing else to do, right?
He's a pretty prolific writer, so let's see what he can do.
Well, and let's not forget, that audio and or video can be interviews, can be a way to preserve this history as well. And that's fairly engaging as a podcaster. I think I have to say that. But video would be really nice too, to get interviews with folks. So,
well, I think your series is fantastic because it is doing that. You are capturing on audio history, and not just the formal history, what conferences and where. You are capturing the history of the people, the everyday people, so to speak, their everyday lives in many ways in your podcast. And so I think it adds a dimension to the history of psychology that you don't get in a written book.
Agreed.
So I think your work, what you and Eric are doing, is such an incredible, invaluable contribution to the teaching of psychology, because teachers, I think they're hearing things that you would not get in a book.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. And the relationships between people, like the fact that I can sit here and watch you all talk about and reminisce about times together, and you were in the same department, but you also served nationally together. You were part of these conferences. That's pretty special to be in the room while this is all going on. So I've been witnessing this for like 3 days now. So it's pretty special. What else do we need to
I
get out of Jenny?
On the front end that I wanted her to talk a little bit about tips for retirement, in case we've got listeners who are like me, considering when to go and how to make that successful. And I wonder what kinds of suggestions you might offer to people to help have an enriched retirement experience, because I know you've achieved it.
I hope so. I'm trying still. I think you have to plan for it. It doesn't just happen. I don't think it just happens. When I retired from JMU, I was retiring knowing that I was going to Psi Chi. Well, when I first initiated the retirement, I did not know that. But by the time I was getting ready to retire, I knew that I was from JMU and from teaching. I knew that I was going to Psi Chi and had that to look forward to. I think when I retired from Psi Chi, that was a difficult struggle. And I really had to plan for what I was going to do with my time. As a professional, I think who I was, to a large extent, was defined by my career and what I did. And I think that it was hard to think I wouldn't have that anymore. And I mean, my family is very important to me. And 3 daughters, a daughter and 2 stepdaughters, and watching them grow and so forth was certainly important in my life. But also, I think as a woman, I was I defined myself in part, for a large part, as a psychology faculty member and a person who was involved at the national level in psychology. So when I retired, that first year was terrible. I was really struggling I had lots to do. It wasn't that I didn't have things to do. I have a lot of hobbies and family. So and my husband, one of the reasons I retired was he wanted to travel more extensively. So I had things to do, but I didn't have that sense of purpose, that sense of integration of how are these things going to bring meaning to my life. So I think for a successful retirement, if you can think about that beforehand, and it's going to be different for every person, I think, what your interests are, what your values are, where you want to spend time, where you find joy and gratification will be different. But think about that at the up front, and so that when you do retire, you've got something to transition into that will bring you the same joy that you experience as a professional. I think for many people, if you can do it, I think it would work well when you can ease out of it. I know, several faculty friends over the years have talked about they retired, but they did it in a phased manner, so that they only taught half of their courses, and then a year of just one course, and then maybe some part-time teaching. And so they sort of phased out of it, and it wasn't quite the shock to the system that just
very humane.
And I think if you can do that, I would highly advise people to try to incorporate that into their retirement plans.
I think that's good advice.
Are you, in your retirement, are you still, and I mean this in whatever sense you want to take it, teaching?
Well, that is a good question. And interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, I think I am actually. I'm involved in several groups around Harrisonburg. When I lived at Smith Mountain Lake, I was involved there, and I guess I did find myself in a way teaching. For example, I volunteered at the local library down there. Well, they were trying to digitize some of their loan program, and I was a volunteer, and I said one day, well, I can help you with that. And so I designed a program for them and had several workshops to teach them how to do it. And so that was teaching. I didn't think about it in that way until just now, actually, but yeah. And then here I'm teaching different things. For example, the women's group that I'm involved in here, PEO, we're getting ready to have a convention that our chapter is a host for. And so we're making things. And so I love to sew. That's one of my many hobbies. So I said, let's make some travel kits. Well, how do you do that? Well, I've had several workshops on teaching them how to make these kits. I love to make cards. That's another hobby that I have. And I've done several workshops on how to make cards. And the fun part about it is the same thing I loved most about teaching. Organizing those notes, thinking about how to get them involved. Yes.
Yeah. Jane's pointing to Jenny's notes right now in front of her.
I loved that part of teaching, that as much as I loved being in the classroom with students, I loved the organization part of it, pulling together ideas and pulling together material and finding ways to make it more interesting. And I find I'm still doing that. I never thought about that, but I am, I guess.
I have this image in my head of you in that garage with your sisters and, and teaching them at 9 years old. And then you with these other friends, groups of friends who you're doing workshops with, and that just hasn't changed over the years.
No, they're all much older now. Of course, they're all gray haired, and but yes, I still love doing that, and I find myself unintentionally, or maybe it isn't unintentional, in positions to offer to do those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So I still get enjoyment out of doing it, and I hope I can continue to do it.
Well, as we bring the conversation to a close, I feel like I need to invoke the spirit of Charles Brewer here and say, if he were here, he'd say, Yeah, she's a damn jewel. Because every time he'd refer to her, it would be Jenny Mathie. She's a damn jewel. So thank you for proving that.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come and interview me and give me the opportunity to share some wonderful memories that I have from many years of teaching and being involved in the teaching of psychology groups.
Well, it has been a pleasure, and I know there are many, many people in our little group, the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, who will love to hear from you, hear what you've been up to, and just thank you for the legacy you've left. I think we don't even know.
It is huge.
Yeah, but it's big.
Bigger
than we know, and it's been a pleasure. So it's our pleasure to interview you today. So thanks.
Well, thank you very much.